All right, everyone, we're back for round two. This is awesome. So, Kyle and I are joining forces again and continuing this format where what we're going to do is talk about some of the bigger stories from the past week and kind of highlight what you need to know, all in an effort to give you the information and make you feel comfortable about heading back out in the civilian world and like what's going on. And when people talk about the Fed and interest rates and unemployment and everything, you can kind of have a better grasp of what that means and, take that with you into your job and or into an interview or whatever it is. It's just good information to know, especially when you're heading back out into the wild of the civilian world. All right. So the first thing we're going to do, so the mission brief. So this is military related news. This is stuff that affects us as veterans, and like I think kind of we have a personal attention to. So the first thing we're going to talk about is uh, I'm trying to give you all like the long and short here. Essentially what happened was Marine Corps Commandant asked for 125 million in uh, ground-based missile systems. So first of all, 125 million, I mean, drop in the bucket in DoD's budget. But what's bigger here is like the signal that this is asking from him, and it's directly in reference to providing ground-based missile systems for Marines in the Pacific Theater, all in an effort to combat the threat of potentially China. So like the way I was trying to think about like how the Marines are thinking about using this is if you think, World War II style island hopping in order to get air bases so that, we can launch attacks against Japanese aircraft carriers and launch attacks on Japan. This is like island hopping, but so that we can launch Tomahawk missiles at either Chinese warships, or into mainland China itself. If we were to get to that point, hopefully we don't, but that's what's going on. So, Kyle, what were your thoughts on all this? Have you seen any of it?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, right? And it's interesting for a couple of reasons because it's a mixture of both the political, the economic, and the military, right? Which I think is something that we all feel would be interested at. And from the political standpoint, right? There was a treaty that the U.S. has abided by for a very long time, which was the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, that basically banned all ground-launched missiles, nuclear conventional, that can travel 500 to 5,500 kilometers. So a really, really long range, right? And basically it said you cannot have missiles like this that can be shot from a ground-based location, right? They can be fired from planes or ships, right? But they can't be fired from a ground-based location. And the general idea about that is that it's much more expensive to deploy them, via a plane or ship than it is to just kind of park them on a coastline. And so the idea is that would limit the proliferation of these missiles. Well, in 2019, the Trump administration withdrew from the INF because it basically confirmed that Russia had stopped following it a very long time ago. And it's kind of set the U.S. up. We have a bit of a capabilities gap here. And because China, I don't believe, was ever party to this treaty, they've been working to develop these ground-based long-range missiles for a while now, right? And China doesn't have a blue water navy, or not a blue water navy as we would recognize it. And so because they view, when China looks out across the China Sea, what essentially they see, right, is they see dozens and dozens and dozens of U.S. allies and U.S. warships and and bases stretching all the way out to Hawaii, essentially. And so to them, they feel a lot of pressure to be able to, hey, we want to be able to impart our, will in this region, right? And so, in addition to building up these fake islands that they claim are, part of China, and then stocking them with some of these missiles, they also have them all along the coastline as well. And so the Marine Corps has basically said that it's, they want to begin to invest in this capability. And the current head of the Marine Corps, who's the commandant, essentially, General David Berger, has basically asked for 125 million for in next year's budget to procure 48 of these ground-launched Tomahawk missiles. 48 missiles, who cares? But like anything, right? You have to take these missiles and you've got to start to get them. You've got to develop the capabilities. You have to integrate them into units. You have to start build up, tactics, techniques, procedures, right? Anybody who's ever like integrated a new feature or integrated a new capability into any organization knows that you're never going to get it right the first time. And China pays attention to this sort of stuff, And
Absolutely.
and so in the current budget, right, basically, you know, the House version of the Defense Appropriations Act has said, okay, well, we're only going to give you half of what you want, right? And like to the DoD, like, you know, 125 million is like a rounding error.
Yeah.
And
Nothing.
to say, yeah, and like it's nothing, right? Like, I mean, what is that, like, what, like less than, I mean, how much does an F-35 cost? Like, I don't know, like $400 million or something. Um,
I'm sure when they sent in the number of 125 million, and then like someone pushed back on that, they're like, wait, I didn't even know we asked for this because there's like a million other things that are way more expensive. And this is the thing you're focusing on. But
yeah. And this, yeah, and you focus on this, but it sends a signal to both our allies and our adversaries, right? Because, you know, we don't, you know, when you think about like how people gauge capabilities and everything, a lot of that is based on investment, right? And if China's seeing that, hey, the U.S. is only, you know, putting out, you know, they requested this capability, which, you know, if you were China, you would say, hey, this would seem like a logical capability for the U.S. to have, given that they've exited the missile treaty. To say like they're going to put in like a paltry sum for it, you know, it kind of says like, hey, is the U.S. really serious about like our intentions here in China? Or about building this up and kind of playing the tit for tat in that part of the world. Because if it's not, then it gives China a signal to say, hey, we can continue to get more aggressive. These guys aren't really serious about defending this part or you know, deploying this capability, which could be you know, which could indicate that they want to more forcefully defend the you know, the China Sea. So I don't know. It's really interesting, and I think it's one that the if you read the Wall Street Journal in their op-ed section, it makes a strong case for why this should be fully funded, right? Because it should send a signal to China that we are very serious. We are very serious about about addressing this capability gap, which would be a big issue if you know, if there ever was some sort of conflict, or, you know, even just for deterrence, right? Which is really what this is about. It's really more about deterrence than an actual conflict. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see, and I think a different way to kind of approach how defense is viewed, given that it isn't just all about, you know, like tactics, right? It isn't just all about, you know, like if I place a ship here or I do this, it's this kind of culmination of state activities, right? To be able to project a message and send deterrence in a way that you know, our allies and adversaries can recognize.
yeah, I think that's a really important point is if you want to get a good idea of, you know, where people's priorities are and like what they're focusing on, look to where they're spending their money. And it absolutely puts a message out there about like how we view our strategy, how we view our strategy with China, how we view our strategy of defense and with allies and everything of where we're putting our money. Because you can make a lot of talk and, you know, make promises and shake a lot of hands and everything, but where you put your money is where you put in your action. And so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, both an organization and I mean and the U.S. government. All right, so we'll wrap up the the mission brief right now and head over to the city sit reps. All right, so we're looking at some economic stories from this past week and what you need to know about them. All right, so first we want to talk about in the past week the Fed had what they call the open market committee meeting. So I believe this is a quarterly meeting. Don't quote me on that. I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, so they have this meeting
Yeah,
fairly regularly, right? And there's
yeah,
actually even a shadow Fed market committee meeting, right? There's
yeah.
actually two, and one of them is like officially aligned with the Fed, and the other one is basically done by former economists who sat on the Fed. You know, my monetary policy professor from Carnegie Mellon, Marvin Goodfriend, who had been on the Fed. Would participate in this shadow market committee, and this is where I was talking about the open one, right? But it's something important for people to know about, right? And both the open market committee and the shadow market committee release basically kind of like reports. Now, the open market committee is the one that actually gets to make the decisions, right? But the shadow market committee gets to you know, basically also issue an opinion, right? And then gets taken into consideration by business leaders and, you know, political leaders and et cetera, right? And so when they release this report, you know, basically they're kind of saying like, hey, what are we going to, you know, here's what we think we're going to continue to do. And here's why, right? It's basically an explanation of why of where they think the economy is going and the actions that the Fed is going to take, given its mandate to work with the economy. And we can talk about the mandate here in a second.
Yeah, yeah. One question. I don't know if your professor ever talked about this. Do they actually call it the shadow committee meeting?
Um,
I really
the
hope not, because that's a terrible name for
the shadow. the Shadow Market Committee meeting. I think the people who do actually, it's called the Shadow Open Market Committee meeting. Yeah, they actually do call it. You can go shadowfed.org, and it's the Shadow Open Market Committee. It's an independent economic analysis committee founded in 1973 by yada yada yada.
They gotta get a better name. That sounds like some type of like evil Bond villain organization.
Illuminati sort of.
Yeah. Okay, but I'm sure they're not actually controlling the world. That's the good news here. So I think it's important to know like what the Fed is for everyone and what they do. So the Fed, like pretty much any central bank you're going to find, has two main things that they're focused on. One is controlling inflation and like maintaining inflation goals, and then two is orchestrating. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's easier. Like you want to look at it as like what they would call a mandate, right? And so the Fed has objectives established for it by Congress, and they are maximizing employment, stabilizing prices, and moderating long-term interest rates, right? And so the maximizing employment and stabilizing prices are generally referred to as the Federal Reserve's dual mandate, right? That is like they're kind of like core like thing they should be doing, which is, hey, we want to make sure everybody in America can be as employed as possible, and prices of goods and services are generally stabilized, right? And then the other one, the long-term interest rate, a little more controversial. A lot of people don't kind of like that, but it's one of the moderating long-term interest rates is one of the primary tools that the Fed uses to achieve the first mandate, which is, or the first dual mandate, which is maximizing employment and stabilizing prices. So you want me to keep going, or you want to hop in?
No, I think let's hop into something else. I think we'll start this as a primer, and we'll continue these conversations because going into the Fed and interest rates and everything could be, we're going to have more stories for that in the future. We'll hang on to it. But we just want people to know like this happened, and I think what's important to know about like why people care about these meetings is like they produce these reports, and in these reports, they put their forecasts for their general outlook on the state of the economy, like what they're thinking about as far as what the unemployment and employment picture is going to look like, as well as their projections for inflation. And so for a lot of companies, the really big firms are going to have in-house economists or be working hiring economist teams or whatever to get these types of outlooks. But a lot of companies don't kind of have that power, and so like they're really leaning on these reports from the Fed to see what the economic outlook is going to look like over the next couple of years as they plan, the next phase of their business operations or whatever.
Yeah, and what people are really interested about is they really want to see coming out of the Fed is what are interest rates going to be, right? Because interest rates kind of have this cascading effect. Given that the Fed kind of sets the interbank lending rate that they're going to basically lend money to banks to, right, which has cascading effects throughout the economy. That eventually trickles down into mortgages, bank loans for all sorts of stuff, right? Basically the cost to lend money to each other, and then also it also trickles down into essentially like with the open market committee, like are they going to keep injecting liquidity into the marketplace, right, by buying bonds or selling back bonds, right? And that basically helps control the money supply of the United States, which can really affect monetary policy. So the Fed it's complicated, right? And it's something that like Mark mentioned, we're going to have to keep doing kind of repeated observations of in order for people to kind of start to get the pattern of what's going on here, right? Because just talking about it for one time can be a little difficult. But essentially they want to make sure that we're maximizing employment and that prices are stabilized, and that you're not going to suddenly go from like a 2% interest rate for a mortgage to like 20% overnight, which could happen if there was some sort of not monetary policy that wasn't being applied.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the most important thing to take away from this right now. Like if all you know about is that there's this organization called the Fed, Kyle talked about, what their mandates are, and know that like their job is to try and keep things as stable and as predictable as possible so that everyone else functioning around the economy can keep moving forward in that kind of, in the predictable environment. All right.
Businesses love a stable
Yeah.
environment
Yeah.
because it allows them to make investments, right?
Yeah.
It allows them to see how can we deploy capital in a long-term way that makes sense, right? And whether, that regulatory environment is good or bad, they just want something that's stable
Right.
because you cannot you cannot commit large sums of capital, which really are the main drivers of growth in the economy through capital expenditures. If you aren't able to effectively plan for it. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. In general, right, the Fed has really gone to this like really loose monetary policy where they essentially are intervening as much as possible. And there's a lot of debate among that. And like, is that really should that really be the Fed's role given their mandate? And, it's for people way smarter than myself or, Mark, you're probably smarter than me. It's for people who are, smarter
I
than
got
us
6 weeks
to
of
decide.
econ under my belt. Not exactly an economist here, folks.
But I mean, it is complicated stuff, right? And it's something people should pay attention to.
Yeah.
So we'll keep hitting on that in future episodes.
For sure. All right. Next story we're moving on to. So as we were looking for potential stories to talk about this week, I had mentioned to Kyle that I was like, okay, there's another tech lawsuit focused on. Like, I'm losing track of them all right now because it seems like everyone is crossing wires and like suing each other and getting in all kinds of things in the U.S. and Europe. But the one we wanted to highlight, particular for this week, is that Facebook is joining the lawsuit against Apple, primarily because their argument is that the App Store and Apple are the central bank, if you will, and that they have an unfair competitive monopoly on apps. And where that kind of matters is like access to advertising and marketing opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook is making the argument that negatively impacts or like there's gonna be a change in policy with iOS 14, I think, and it's going to change something with like how people can access advertising dollars.
Yeah. So, Apple has kind of like staked its, if you ever watch Apple commercials, right? I think this is really interesting. If you watch Apple commercials, you'll kind of see the way they position their products now is they say, we are the privacy product, right? Like nobody's going to get into your stuff. People are not going to get into your phone. People aren't going to be able to read your stuff, right? You're going to have all this control over your data.
Yeah. Hold on. I want to jump in just for a second because I remembering back in my head of what happened now. So the update to iOS 14, what it was going to be was you could opt out of the data that you provide to these apps. That's what it was. Sorry.
Well, specifically, it said all the apps are going to now come with a privacy label with disclosures and all the data collected, right? So awareness to somebody being, to somebody maybe who's not as sophisticated, right, is, say me, I'm so sophisticated, and then also, the apps are going to have to ask explicit permission to track users, which if you should now see on your phone, right? Like it tells me all the time, like, hey, you're being tracked, that, right? Which it didn't used to before. And so that's how Apple's positioning itself, right? And Facebook obviously does not like that because, Facebook basically takes your information and uses it to find ways to learn more about you and sell you advertising, right? Like that's how Facebook makes money, is they make their money through advertising. And so it's obviously a big threat to Facebook's business, and they feel that they basically don't want to let it happen. So it's interesting to see. They've actually been tweeting at each other, both Facebook and Apple, these like privacy wars that kind of started back in May 2019. It's all very like, it's all kind of like positioning and like what you call like a lukewarm kind of like cold tweeting war, basically trying to like publicly like put their positions out, but not say something so like egregious, right, that it makes like continued negotiations impossible.
I mean, like they're doing that on Twitter, but like this week, Facebook took out full page ads in there's a Wall Street Journal and another newspaper that I'm forgetting, basically laying out their position and explaining like why they are joining this lawsuit against Apple. And it's kind of amusing to me that like they're hitching their wagon to the like, we're protecting small business. Like that's the argument that they're making. And
we know whose lawsuit they latched it onto was Epic, who makes Fortnite, right?
Yeah.
Because basically, if Epic tried to like was like violating like Apple's terms of service, right, and how they were pushing Fortnite, or I think it might have been some of the in-game purchases, right, because they were trying to find ways to basically bypass the fact that Apple gets a cut of like pretty much every monetary transaction that comes to the App Store, which is clearly annoying, if you're on the App Store, good if you're an Apple investor, which a lot of us are. But yeah, very, very interesting, right? That they would jump onto this and try to find some relief here. But Facebook is very scared that app tracking transparency is going to hurt their ad revenue in the short term, and also more importantly, kind of hurt their algorithms in the long term that basically allow them to kind of optimize the sort of information that's delivered to you, so you can like sit on there and like rage in your social media bubble about X, Y, and Z. So yeah, very, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a really. I personally think I'm a huge fan of privacy and especially data privacy, and I think it's something that we as American people and like companies and government is not talking about enough. And so I'm glad to see like Apple's taking this step, because I think they've long had the position of being kind of like the central holding facility for everyone to go through. They're like the bank you have to route all your
Yeah.
transfers through for technology. And I think they're kind of starting to take that ownership and say, we can do a few things on our phones that we know everyone uses, and it's going to change like how data is collected on individuals across the world, really. Yeah, it's gonna be fascinating stuff. I'm excited to see what happens with it.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's a play, right? The fact that our phones are so useful to us are the fact that they collect just an almost unimaginable amount of data on us, and there's a cost to that. And we as a society have to kind of see what we're comfortable with, right? Because ultimately some of this will hurt innovation in the short term, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
All right, next big story that we want to get into. So if you're not aware, the SolarWinds attack. So SolarWinds is a tech company, and essentially what they do is they help create software for tons of different government agencies and organizations. They were hacked by someone, we don't know who. Presumably, it's been accused that it was the Russians. And it's like it's interesting attack because it wasn't a direct one, so they didn't go directly for the Fed or this organization or Department of Energy or whatever. They went to their service provider, so they went to the people who make software for all these government agencies, and they put like a back door into that software that they then got into. At least that's what it looks like at this point. So yeah, have you been keeping track of this at all, Kyle?
I have, and I actually think it's really interesting, right? Because I think security breach is really bad when no one in government wants to talk about it.
Yeah,
and that's basically like the fact that you haven't heard more about this, I think should be
alarming,
right? I think the analogy that I heard there's two analogies that I heard that made sense. The first one is if the Japanese basically did a practice run on Pearl Harbor, but didn't actually drop any bombs. And then the second one it was as if somebody's been walking around your house for like 6 months and you had no idea. And that's essentially what the Russians did. The Russians, who are the ones who probably were behind the hack, even though, Putin basically said no, which is, he says no to everything, right? I mean, why would
right?
And they basically, and they just don't know the extent of what happened, right? So they think these guys they think the Russians got in through SolarWinds and were able to basically look at Department of State, Treasury, Homeland Security, Energy, Commerce, like National Institutes of Health. Yeah, not everything. Good, right? Yeah. Like not good in any way. And they basically, walked around and kind of took a look at what was there, but didn't take anything, which that's like the initial reports, right? But if anybody remembers from the military, like the initial report's always wrong. And so we don't know like what they've done, what back doors they left, like other, like we just don't know, right? And it's not good. And the U.S. has been investing massively in cybersecurity for a long time. I think, what was it? They've spent tens of billions on cyber defenses in a project known as Einstein. And like, that might've been like the cyber equivalent of France's Maginot Line in the 1940s, like this is a problem, right? And I think, people need to be more aware that, there's some big, like cybersecurity is so important, right? And like, in the U.S., just we just haven't got there. Like, I don't know how, Russia, they've been investing in, this kind of force projection capability, right? Given that they don't have the same kind of like physical force projection capabilities that we do. But to them, this is their ability of being able to say like deploy like, a division or brigades of troops over to like Germany or Korea on like a short term's notice. Like this is their like margin of excellence capability, and they're using it against us. It's very concerning, and nobody's talking about it, at least in the government. So
No, I think you're totally right. That the silence is deafening right now because no one is giving answers, and I think because a lot of reasons, like no one knows the answers. No one really knows like what all has happened, and yeah, the fact that they've just been seemingly like peeking around, I love the analogy of someone walking around your house for 6 months because you're like, okay, well, did you find like my hidden stash somewhere? Did you like
like you don't know,
plant
like
cameras behind a door or something? Like how much of my life do you know about now? And like that's what's happening for the entire US government, which is fucking terrifying.
And when you think about how governments interact too, right? Governments do stuff, everybody's always incentivized to do stuff, right? And so far there hasn't been a cost to any of these actors for these kind of like breach of like cyber, these huge cybersecurity breaches, right? Which is obviously the worst one, right? If you remember, China, hacked the OPM database a couple years ago, which resulted in like mostly everybody in the military getting a letter saying like, hey, your information is probably with China now. But until their adversaries in the digital age, have some sort of consequence to this, right? Like it's going to keep happening, right? And so we don't know like what the US should do to respond to this, to basically make the cost not worth the reward. But it's essentially digital terrorism is what this is. And it's kind of like the equivalent of these like hijackings and bombings you saw in the 80s and 90s, but now it's it's cyber and you don't see it. So very scary stuff for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, since we're in the realm of cybersecurity and like personal privacy and data and everything, we're going to switch over to another topic here of Bitcoin. So if you haven't been aware, Bitcoin has just blown up in the last couple of weeks. I think I looked before the start of this podcast and it was sitting around 23,009 something or the other at a price per Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, what was it? One Bitcoin equals $23,554. That is
absolutely bonkers.
So, if you knew anything about me personally, right, you would know, and basically some of the things I say on Instagram, you would know that I'm a big believer in intrinsic investing. And intrinsic investing is basically saying like you have an asset and the asset produces cash flows, or it can produce some cash flow in the future, right? And that is basically how you back into an evaluation of the asset. There's science behind it. It's generally accepted in how you do it for companies, for anything else, right? And fundamentally, the problem with Bitcoin is that there is no way to intrinsically value Bitcoin right now. It is pure speculation. It has always been about, we think something's going to happen in the future, and people just kind of trading off of that, saying like, okay, I have it. I'll sell it to you if you give me $2. And then somebody says, okay, I'll buy it from you. And then I'll say, hey, I'll sell it to somebody else if you can give me $3 for it, right? But nobody's ever sat down and said, okay, like what, I understand the concept of like, distributed ledgers and digital currency and everything, but like, can somebody tell me exactly what is the intrinsic value behind Bitcoin? Because I just don't know. I just don't know. Like the play seems to be at some point, at some point governments are just going to adopt it as like a de facto standard. But like, I just don't believe that. Like,
Yeah,
I just don't believe
I think the intrinsic value that a lot of people see in it, and I think the people who actually believe this are like a very slim minority, the people who have any type of cryptocurrency, but it's a fiat currency like the US dollar or the euro or the British pound or whatever. It is, like you can hold one and objectively like $100 bill has objectively has no value.
Yeah.
All I can do with it is start a fire, like wipe my ass or something. That's really it. But we have this trust in the system that says that this piece of paper is worth $100. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and everything, I think people look at them and say, I don't know if that trust in the system is always going to be there. That, I don't know if governments are always going to have power, or that, the system's going to collapse or whatever. It's kind of something like a little too crazy for my taste, if you will. But it's saying that like, here's this other form of currency. We're also placing trust in it. And then like, I can use it to exchange value. Because at the end of the day, money is just trust.
Yeah.
Trust this thing is, is what I say it is. So what I find fascinating about what's going on with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency right now. So I'm looking at this graph right now, and I'm sorry you all can't see it, but it's looking at the searches, the Google searches for Bitcoin over time. And so if you remember the last giant bubble when Bitcoin hit about like 19,000 or something like that, this was late 2017. Tons of searches, like the search history just spikes at this 2-week window in November when everyone is looking up Bitcoin,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I remember being in business school, like everybody was like losing their mind over this, right? Like,
Right. And then you look at the search history and it just like right now there's nothing like that. So like the amount of people who are like looking into Bitcoin it's way smaller than it was before. Okay. And what's that saying is that like the types of investors who were going into Bitcoin and like what's driving the giant rise in prices is a lot different than it was before. So I think there were like two main parties that drove like the last major bubble. You had the people who got in on like day one, like the crazies that were mining their own Bitcoin and everything and turned, a couple cents into $19,000. And those people were waiting to cash out.
yeah.
Then you had people who were just like, oh man, this sounds kind of cool. This is interesting. The price is going up. I'm going to throw some money in there. And then it went up and they're like, okay, now I got to pull out. But now I think like the story and the narrative around it is starting to change because some like major players are getting into Bitcoin, So I'm looking at this stat right now. So the Cash App, if you've ever heard of, have you ever listened to Joe Rogan's show? He always talks about the Cash App.
Yeah, or like any of these podcasts, like come get the Cash App.
Come get the Cash App, right?
Maybe we'll eventually do that if enough people listen to this.
Right. I hope to one day be advertising the Cash App.
Yeah.
So if you look at their Q3 revenue, 80% of it came from Bitcoin transactions. PayPal has entered the picture in being able to buy and sell Bitcoin. Fidelity launched the Bitcoin fund. There's a minimum investment of $100,000 to buy into this fund. There was a hedge fund that just put like $300 million into Bitcoin. It's just crazy. Like this isn't just, these, wild libertarians or like crazy tech people or anything more. It's like major players are entering into the space because they think the value is going to go up. It's wild.
Well, so here's I'm going to give a contrarian opinion here, and people basically who are bullish on Bitcoin continue to say, oh well, there's like finally like a digital payment revolution that's underway and it's being led by Bitcoin. But the interesting thing about blockchain is that it can be tethered to like multiple different types of digital currency, right? And that can then be used in conjunction with a fiat currency like the dollar. So it can operate independent of a tethered token, right? So like the idea that like Bitcoin is like it, right? I just think is maybe like people who has some kind of like flawed assumptions baked into it, right? Like if you go on Coinbase right now, like I have a Coinbase account and I don't really trade crypto, but like you can go in there and you can, they have like basically a market for all this, all these different types of cryptocurrencies, right? And they kind of float, but they also have, people want a stable currency, right? And so they have, you can buy this like USDC coin, right? Which is basically like pegged one for $1. So like whatever coin you buy also has like an actual dollar behind it, in a bank account somewhere. So I mean, a cryptocurrency is going to become a thing, right? It's going to become like, if you from like my personal view, right? Like you'll be able to make transactions or buy something with like some like form of like cryptocurrency, like almost like you use like Amazon points, right, to like buy something on like Amazon, but then it'll always kind of be like tethered to like some sort of like fiat currency, or there'll be some sort of like conversion method, right, where eventually like it gets converted back into like your bank account. But it could become increasingly, it could be that you just increasingly use crypto, right? Like it just becomes this kind of like token or credit you use, almost like you can have like a Venmo balance, right? And eventually, if you want to take that and liquidate it back into like physical dollars in your bank account, it might be possible. But is Bitcoin going to be the one to do that? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm personally under no impressions that is going to be. So in full disclosure, I have some crypto, and like the way I've looked at it, it was, I had some spare cash laying around after deployment and was like, yeah, you know what, let me toss some in there. And my personal investing strategy is like overwhelming majority of my portfolio is in like very basic, boring, passively invested.
Market tracking index funds.
Right. Exactly. And then I have a very small percentage that's in stuff like this because I'm like, I'm hoping this is going to 10x. But if it doesn't, it's not going to break the bank for me. That's
Yeah.
the way I look at it.
Yeah, and you're already giving yourself like some good risk exposure with those index funds too. You say they were like boring, right? But like for like listeners out there, if you like are in the S&P 500 index fund, that can be a fairly volatile investment, simply because it is tracking the market, right? And so, but if you're young, right, you want that sort of volatility, you want that risk exposure, because when you hear volatility and risk, don't think it as a bad thing, right? Also think of it as, you want your investment to be able to capture those big market gains, right? And yeah, you're gonna get some of the market losses as well, but there's like a lot of evidence behind holding index funds, right, as the economy continues to grow. And just day trading, most people are just not very good at it. But it's also but also having the ability to make some smaller speculative plays is not a bad thing either. So like you can make money on Bitcoin. I just don't know how to value it, like so
All the one thing I am sure of right now, Kyle, is like when we post about this on Instagram or whatever, and we mentioned that we talked about Bitcoin and we hashtag it, we're gonna get all kinds of annoying DMs and people
yeah
commenting, being
for yeah
like
yeah
forex trading, Bitcoin, blah 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 blah. And of
yeah like if
course,
you get forex trading or crypto DMs, just ignore them because they
yes,
are
yes,
scams. Like,
yeah.
just don't do it. Like, it's a terrible idea.
Them
um
and the damn like military shout out pages, they're
oh my
oh my
gosh,
gosh,
I have no idea. what's going on there. I don't know if that's like a bot, or it
I
just
don't know, man.
you run across some weird things on the internet, and
Yeah,
that is one of them. And I'm just like, what is this? Like, I
there's like
don't.
there's one in particular that
Yeah.
like always posts, and I mean they have like 300,000 followers. I see your wife there in the background. What's up, Carrie?
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, my wife's walking in the background. Yeah, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it's also like, I think a lot of these are just like they're spam accounts. They've been bought by, because you can buy followers right now.
yeah,
I don't do that, right? I'm all organic, But yeah, there's some crazy stuff you see out there,
yeah.
and like I don't know what these people are up to.
Okay, all right. Well, this kind of wraps up the stories we were gonna hit for the day. But before we finish up, Kyle, why don't you fill everyone in on where you're at and kind of how
Yeah,
this facility
yeah.
happened for you?
So if you've noticed, I'm in something that resembles this kind of like palatial hotel room, and I told Mark before we started that I kind of wanted to give like a brief overview of this, right? So currently we're at the Disney World Dolphin Resort, right, which is the one kind of like Marriott property that Disney has, like kind of like physically on its premises. And so it's the Dolphin and the Swan, and these kind of like two hotels that are connected, right? And they have like different names, but essentially they're the same hotel, right? And they're nice hotels. Like I think they have like a Shula's like steakhouse downstairs, and so Carrie and I wanted to, we wanted to come down here and take our oldest daughter on a, sort of a Disney trip, right? Because we enjoy it, and she's we don't get to spend. We have two kids, right? And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to use like some Marriott points or whatever to do it. And so I recently hit Titanium Elite again, which is like the second to highest level you can get with Marriott. The next one is Ambassador, and you like literally get like this person you can call. And so I called up Marriott, and I was like, hey, I have this like free night credit. I have some points. Can you guys like stitch this together to me so I don't have to pay anything for the hotel room? And they're like, yeah, we can do that, right? You're Titanium Elite. We'll kind of jump through some hoops for you. And so they went and they booked me like 3 different reservations for like the same room, essentially. And then they upgraded that room to this king suite, right? Because like when you hit like a certain level with Marriott, you get called what are SweetNet awards, which are this byproduct from when they did this merger with Starwood. And you can basically just, hey, I want to be upgraded to a suite if there's availability, right? And they'll take that request and they'll basically prioritize it and try to get you upgrade. So Marriott did all this, but I guess didn't tell the Swan, which was the hotel we were originally staying at. So we show up to check in, and the lady's like, what is going on with your reservation? Who did this? Did you talk to the hotel? And I'm like, no, Marriott did it. And she was like, oh my God. So she had to go like talk to her supervisor, and she comes back. She's like, look, the problem is because they booked you for 3 separate reservations and upgraded you to the King Suite on your first one. We don't have it for the other 2 days, right? And so when a situation happens like this, and you're like you have like status with a hotel or airline, they kind of have to like bend over to kind of make it worth your while. because they don't want to, make a loyal customer mad. So they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you a grand suite in the Dolphin, which is next door. And so the grand suite has this like insanely huge parlor room, right? Like here, if you can see it's basically like a living room and everything. And then there's like another bedroom back there. And so we're gonna give you this like grand parlor suite, and the only caveat is you have to come down every day and get like a new hotel room key. It's just kind of like the way it works.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, pretty cool. I mean, it's not like anything like I don't know, kind of lacks some of the things. Like they don't have like a kitchen, which is really what I would have wanted, but it's cool. I mean, it gives me a lot of room to spread out, but I don't think this is ever going to happen again. Like, yeah. But it's just an example of like when you have, because people have asked me like what does status get you? And status just basically gets you, a hotel or airline they're more willing to do things for you that are kind of like outside the bounds of like, normal stuff, right? But yeah, it's cool. We're having a great time. Disney World's always a good time, and they do the kind of social distancing and mask thing down here pretty well, so you feel fairly safe coming down here.
Right on. Yeah, I would encourage anyone. One, like definitely pick a good program and like stick to it because it's a good way to accumulate points. And then two is like you can absolutely do that while you're on active duty. I hit so my last deployment was to Saudi Arabia. I did 6 months, and I was doing I stayed at a Marriott, and I hit Ambassador Elite.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And, it was all paid for by the U.S. government. So like take advantage of that stuff because then you can get personal benefits out of it, and that's totally fine and within the regulation you can do it.
Yeah, especially because like for some jobs in the military, you do go TDY a lot, right? And it really just don't that you're just like if you don't get the rewards, you're just literally throwing away money. Like it just do it, right? It's well worth it. I mean, you got to travel anyway, right? So why as well try to maximize your benefits.
Yeah. We had a new guy come onto our team. We were like, okay, do you got your gear? Let's get you, in process to the company, everything. And then we'd be like, okay, what are your credit cards? Let's lay out your loyalty points. Let's make sure you got your lounge passes set up because we do a lot of TDY and we're here to ball out when we can.
Yeah, you should. I mean, it's definitely the right thing to do. And I mean, you can literally like last year, it's kind of this time last year after Christmas, Carrie and I went to Costa Rica for free. And we stayed at this, it was called the Los Sueños, like Marriott Resort. And it was something like $1,800 a night, but I paid for it with points. And there was something with like the way the points valuation was that like, I couldn't believe how cheap it was by using points. And like everybody we met there was like, oh, and I'm an investment banker from Atlanta, or I own my own company, or, like something like this. I felt like I didn't feel out of place, obviously, but cause I'm happy. I can find a hobnob with people like that. But it was a little like, damn, there are some really successful people here. And it was so much fun. Yeah. And that was That's all. Awesome. And I mean, I paid for that with my blood, sweat, and tears, traveling for that previous year. But it was definitely like a good break, so definitely try to take advantage of that.
Full on. Awesome stuff. All right, well, everyone, that wraps up this week's show. Let us know your thoughts, comment below on the video, hit us up on the social medias. And then additionally to, if you have anything you want us to talk about, let us know and we can, research into it or bring different topics up. If you got questions about either, any of the topics we've discussed or even something, I'm in an MBA program right now. Kyle's a graduate of one. If you have any interest in like that particular path, let us know and we'll try and talk about it at some point on the show. So Kyle, you got anything else you want to say?
Nope. Have a great Christmas weekend. We are going to be having a special AMA guest on Sitreps next week. Guy does private wealth, has been doing it for a while, former,
nice
West Point guys. So this will be a good chance to really kind of learn more about that field, which I think is probably greatly misunderstood, kind of given, the difference between like a registered advisor who does private wealth and like somebody who slings whole life insurance at like Northwestern Mutual. There's a big difference, right? So we're going to talk about that here Sunday after Christmas. That's right.
Okay. Awesome. That's fantastic, man. Good stuff. Hey everyone, stay safe, have fun, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all the stuff. And we'll see you next week. Out. Okay.